We're moving into the section of the book where we're starting to talk about the social issues and how they are affected by campaigns. This chapter gives a little bit of an overview, kind of talking about social justice and social change. So I really wanted to highlight a couple of key ideas that I think are really important, as well as kind of give a real quick example that's not quite as drawn out as some of the other chapters are that we'll get into the coming weeks. So first, what are we even talking about when we're dealing with the idea of social justice? Well, when we think about just the idea by itself, what we're doing is we're talking about addressing disparities. So where there is inequity or unequal opportunities for people, individuals are treated differently and unfairly in some way. So the disparities may be having clean water versus not clean water, economic opportunities versus not having economic opportunities, things like food deserts where there's not an opportunity to buy fresh food in a location because someone doesn't want to open a store there. It could be environmental consequences that are happening to one region versus another, and they're not being addressed because of the type of people that live there or how wealthy they may be, right? There's lots of disparities that exist in our society. And so how this relates to campaigns is taking an attempt to address those disparities. So what we're hoping for is with a campaign to achieve equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal treatment. Now, there is some nuance here that I think is worthwhile. You may have seen an image like this before, this difference between equality and equity. So equal rights and equal opportunities does not necessarily mean that people are given equality, right? Equality is everyone's given the same thing. But as you can see from the picture, giving everyone the same thing doesn't necessarily fix the problem, right? Because the person who needed it the most might not be getting what they needed, but everyone gets the same thing. And so what we're actually hoping to achieve this idea of equity, which is that those that need more receive more and those that don't get as much. And this is where people get really upset, right? As you can see, this idea of all of the issues surrounding the idea of DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. The E part, right? The equity, where we level the playing field, where someone historically has not had access to something due to economic pressures, due to social pressures, due to laws, right? And so giving someone access that wasn't there, so they're all on a level playing field, right? So another way to think about this is, right, getting beyond the equity question, right, where you have people standing on different amount of boxes so they can all see over the fence, right? The real solution is get rid of the fence, right? And we don't have to have arguments about equality. We don't have to have conversations about equity. Everyone has the ability to do things, right? And so that's what we're hoping to achieve when we start talking about campaigns related to human rights, right? We want people to not be harmed because they look different than someone else, or because they were born somewhere else, right? That they should have the same opportunities. So it's a complicated issue. There's lots of social, religious, individual beliefs. There are economic pressures wrapped up in this. There are political questions, legal questions. All right, they get really messy really quick when we start getting into the nuts and bolts of these things. But the big picture is that we're talking about social movements. So a lot of the campaign ideas we've talked about is there's some organization who has structure, who says, hey, let's do this thing. We're interested in fixing this problem, or we are concerned about this cause for better good, or we're a Department of Public Health and we want to make people healthier. And so we're going to tell people, hey, don't eat this junk food. That's how you're going to be healthier. That assumes there's some infrastructure in place to make this happen. But when we start talking about human rights issues, what we often see is that it is sort of left to individuals to come together and say, let's do something better for ourselves. And so you have these social movements with the hope of affecting social change, right? This is citizens coming together to make some sort of collective action. there's usually some social imbalance that has reached some tipping point where people are really upset about it. And so individuals start grumbling, and then other people kind of pick up on the conversation and they hear the grumbling. And it gets to the point where it starts building on its own to where there's kind of a snowball effect. The building momentum of individuals coming together who have these concerns. And then they go put pressure on those that can make the change. And so you see two types of change with this: the incremental, the really slow, drawn out, bit by bit change that you tend to see, or you might see some dramatic upheaval. There is a huge change in the kinds of policies that are enacted. And I always love that image that's on the right here of, we usually think about, right, the big bad group, whatever it may be the, or, government or some corporation or whatever, right? The big fish is always, taking, consuming the little fish, but collectively the little fish together have the power to influence what the big fish is doing. So when you organize the people and you have that collective action, that's when you can affect change. So, there's lots of, nuance to social movement theory that I don't want to spend the time to get caught up in. That's not really the concern of the class, but having some idea of just the distinction between top-down and bottom-up approaches. Right, top-down is where you have some sort of leadership or you have some sort of organization in place that is affecting some of these issues for social change. For instance, Amnesty International is a human rights organization that has campaigns all around the world, and I encourage you to go look at Amnesty International's website and see some of these instances. They are very specific in some cases and are dealing with a particular location within a country, and some of these are multinational problems that require a coordination on an international scale, navigating legal systems of different countries and religious questions, right? And it gets really difficult. And so having a large organization who has a structure in place with financial security and people who know what they're doing with institutional knowledge, right? That's useful. And sometimes you have these bottom-up approaches that they are born out of just people being kind of ticked off with how they're being treated, and they get together, and these are the grassroots movements. This is where it isn't necessarily an individual says, hey, everyone come follow me. It's more everyone's got together, and they all say, hey, let's go over there and fix this. So grassroots movements are very powerful because you start with a lot of momentum behind it, as opposed to those top-down kinds of movements in which you hope an individual is going to be persuasive and compelling to convince people to pay attention to them, let alone to actually go join them to effect some sort of change. So what does this all kind of look like? But I thought I would give you an example of something that I currently work on is this idea of digital equity. And I know it has one of those, words we're not supposed to use anymore, equity, but that's just what it is. And so you can, call a spade a spade. So here we go. So digital equity, what is it we're even talking about? Well, what we're talking about is kind of it's like the digital divide 2.0, right? Who has access to digital tools, who's able to use them, who understands them. And so one of the things that we find is that digital skills and access to devices and the internet is not a luxury, right? We live in a digital economy, and 92% of jobs require digital skills. And so if people don't have them, then they are effectively left out of the economy. And if you're left out of the economy, then you're in a pretty serious state of destitute circumstances. You aren't able to feed yourself, you can't clothe yourself, You can't afford medication. People turn to all sorts of things to get by, right? It generates problems for society overall. So having people and equitable, right? Giving people more skills that need them so that we all have a fundamental basis on interacting with the economy and the world with digital skills and devices is good for us overall, right? And other things that we see is it comes down to as simple as just broadband internet access and adoption. That just because there is internet wired to an area doesn't mean that people have it. And in fact, you can notice in the third column here, the rural columns, broadband accessibility, right? The access, like literally having the lines, right? The wiring, we don't even reach all of the people in our own country. And even when it is there, it's not adopted by everyone. And as some of you might know, just because it's adopted and it's there, doesn't mean it works particularly well. And so there is a lot of effort to put money into fixing this, right? So if we were talking about equality versus equity in this situation, we can see, right, there are areas that don't have internet access and areas that do. So the equality would say we should spend $100 million to fix this. Every one of these areas, urban areas, suburban areas, and rural areas, we're going to spend the same amount of money. Well, you know, in the urban areas, you've got 98.5% of people have access. Well, we don't need to spend the money there. We need to spend more money in the rural areas, right? That's the equity difference, right? Put the money where it's needed, and that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. So other things that we see is this idea of, it's called digital distress, which is basically that people who don't really have reliable internet access, or that only have a phone, or simply don't have a device, right? So they feel like, given all of the things I have available to me, I don't feel like I can access the internet in a meaningful way. And so this is the west central region of the state of Illinois. This is 9 counties, going all the way up to Galesburg, down to Quincy, and a little further south. And so you can see on the left-hand column, right, the percent of households in high digital distress across the U.S. is on average 21.5%. The West Central region is 45.6%. Brown County is 100% of the residents are in digital distress. There are parts of that county that don't have high-speed internet access. People still live there, right? But they don't have access, right? So those are the things that we're talking about we need to fix, right? You have Hancock County, who only has 11% in digital distress, right? Within a 30-minute drive, you can go from being in a wired community to a completely unwired community, right? Those are issues. You know, having access is something that matters. So one of the things that you often have to deal with a human rights issue is, you know, what is the goal? Well, the state of Illinois actually has a digital equity plan that they have passed, and it states that all Illinoisans must be enabled to use the internet effectively, confidently, safely, and equitably. There's that equitable word again, right? So basically, the idea is that everyone should have access, right? That should be literally wired to every home. It should work. It should be affordable. It should be safe. People should know how to use it. And we should put our resources and distribute them equitably, right? Where it is needed, right? The downtown Chicago doesn't need any of the funds spent. Rural communities do. So put the money where it's needed. So what exactly is being done, and what are the kinds of things that we can do? So this is the list of stuff that the state of Illinois would like to have happen. And it is happening in various degrees, depending on what makes sense in some areas. So for instance, some communities are really focused on distributing devices. So buying laptops and handing them to people. You have the ability to get broadband internet access. You can have high-speed internet access and you know how to use it, but you don't have a thing to get on it with, right? And these are expensive pieces of machine, right? You can't afford it. Well, problem solved, right? That's one way to do it. Literacy and skills training. Some people have a computer and have internet, no idea what they're doing when they get on it. So there are classes being held around the state on basic skills such as how to use Microsoft Word, how to set up a Gmail account, how to upload a resume to a website, for a job application, right? How do you do these things? How do you access your health records and know what results are for tests that you've had performed? All the way down to tech support for communities, affordability programs, so providing some funds to allow people to afford it, dealing with infrastructure. So the state of Illinois has just over $1 billion being spent over the next 5 years to run fiber optic cables to communities. Building coalitions, bringing in organizations who would partner with this, and then developing community technology centers. So putting in community computer labs that are free and available so that people can come in and access it. And this is a place where some of these skill building can happen, right? So, where do we need these things to happen? You go to the community that's in need and you provide what they need, right? That's the equitable part of it. So when we talk about having a campaign and what do we want to accomplish and how are we going about doing it and telling people about it, right? So all of these things sound great, right? But the difficulty is telling people these things exist, and how do you find the people that are actually in need? And this is, at the heart of the communicative problem of solving social issues. You may have the solution, but if you don't tell people the solution exists, well, they're never going to have it.